He sat quietly in the corner of the small workshop, his hands resting on his knees, covered in fine dust from a long day of work. The sound of hammers and machines filled the air, mixing with the smell of grease and sweat. Every few minutes, the supervisor's loud voice broke through the noise, giving orders, correcting someone, or simply shouting because he could. Most of the workers had learned to keep their heads down and say nothing. It was safer that way. But for him, silence was harder than work. Because when he was quiet, his mind would drift to music, to melodies that danced somewhere deep inside him, waiting to be played. Sometimes he would tap his fingers on the edge of a table softly, as if there was an invisible piano in front of him. The rhythm kept him calm, even when the world around him felt heavy. He hadn't always been a factory worker. Years ago, when he was younger, his world had been full of music. His father used to fix old radios, and their small home was always filled with the sound of songs from stations far away. He had never gone to music school, his family couldn't afford that, but he had taught himself how to play the piano on an old broken one that his neighbor was throwing away. Half the keys didn't work, the pedals were rusty, but he didn't care. Every day after work, he would sit and play until the stars came out. But then life changed. His father passed away, his mother fell ill, and the hospital bills started piling up. The piano was sold to pay for medicine, and with that, music seemed to fade from his life like a dream that ends when the sun rises. Now, years later, he worked in this dull, noisy place, just another face in a line of tired workers. The boss, a man with a deep voice and a wide smile that never reached his eyes, ran the factory like a kingdom. He liked people who obeyed. He didn't like dreamers. One afternoon, when the machines stopped for a short break, someone in the corner began humming. It was soft at first, but then a few others joined in, laughing quietly. One of them turned to him and said, "Hey, you used to play music, didn't you? Didn't you say you played piano?" He smiled shyly. "A long time ago." "Then show us sometime," another worker said. "There's an old piano in the canteen, you know. They brought it in for decoration, but no one uses it. Maybe you could make it come alive." He laughed a little, shaking his head. "I don't think the boss would like that." They laughed too, but not loudly. Everyone knew how the boss felt about anything that wasn't work. He believed music and laughter were a waste of time. The workers were there to produce, not to play. Still, that night, he couldn't stop thinking about the piano in the canteen. He imagined it, dusty, forgotten, sitting in a corner under a flickering light. Maybe a few keys were missing, but maybe it could still sing. The next day, during the lunch break, curiosity got the better of him. He walked into the canteen, making sure no one was around. The piano was there, just as he imagined. Old, scratched, but still standing tall like it had been waiting for someone. He brushed the dust off the keys and pressed one gently. A low, warm sound filled the empty room. It was slightly out of tune, but it made his heart skip a beat. He pressed another key, then another. Soon his hands started moving on their own, remembering patterns they hadn't touched in years. A melody began to form, soft, uncertain at first, but then stronger, clearer. It was a tune he used to play for his mother when she couldn't sleep. He didn't notice the door open. He didn't see the two workers who had come in early to eat. They stood silently, listening. One whispered, "He's good." By the time he realized he wasn't alone, 3 more people had gathered. When he stopped playing, embarrassed, they clapped quietly. "Play again," one of them said. "That was beautiful." He smiled nervously, but sat back down. "Just for a minute," he said. The music filled the canteen once more. For a few short moments, the sound of machines and shouting outside disappeared. It was just him and the piano, like old times. But then came the voice that froze everyone in place. "What's going on here?" The boss stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his face unreadable. The workers stepped back, their smiles fading. He quickly stood up. "I'm sorry, sir, I was just—" "Playing?" the boss interrupted. He walked closer, tapping the piano with his finger. "This isn't a music hall. You're here to work, not entertain." "I know, sir. I won't do it again." The boss stared at him for a moment, then laughed, a short, sharp laugh that made everyone uneasy. "If he plays the piano again," he said loudly, "I'll fire him." The workers looked down. The man felt his chest tighten. The boss turned and walked out, still shaking his head. "A piano in a factory," he muttered. "Ridiculous." The canteen was silent after that. The man closed the piano gently, his hands trembling. One of the workers whispered, "Forget him. You play better than anyone I've heard." He didn't answer. He just walked back to his station, trying to push the sound of the piano out of his mind. But it stayed with him, repeating over and over like a song that refuses to end. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about how alive he had felt while playing. For a few minutes, he wasn't just another worker. He was himself again. The man who loved music. The boy who believed in melodies. The next few days passed in silence. No one mentioned the piano. But something had changed. The other workers looked at him differently, not with pity but with quiet respect. They had seen something rare in him, something they didn't have the courage to show in themselves. One evening, as the shift was ending, he stayed behind to clean his station. The factory was almost empty. The faint light from the windows cast long shadows on the floor. He could hear the wind outside whistling softly, like a note from a faraway song. He walked past the canteen again. The piano was still there, alone in the dark. He stopped. His heart was racing. "No," he whispered to himself. "You can't." But then another voice inside him said, "What can they take from you that you haven't already lost?" He walked in slowly and sat down. His hands hovered over the keys. Then he began to play, softly at first, then with more feeling. The sound filled the room again, rich and full. It was the same tune he had played before, but now it carried something deeper. A quiet defiance, a cry from someone who had been silent too long. He didn't notice the time. He didn't notice the door creak open again. This time, it wasn't the boss. It was the janitor, a quiet old man who had worked there for decades. He stood near the doorway, listening with his mop in hand. When the music stopped, he smiled. "You play like the piano has something to say," the old man said. He smiled shyly. "Maybe it does. Maybe we both do." The janitor nodded. "Don't stop. The world has enough noise. It needs more music." Those words stayed with him. He didn't know it yet, but they would soon change everything. Because even though the boss's warning echoed in his mind, something stronger was growing inside him. The need to be heard, to play, to live again through his music. And deep down, he knew that no threat, no job, no fear could silence that forever. That night, as he walked home under the streetlights, his hands were still moving slightly, invisible keys beneath his fingers. The melody from the piano played. Quietly in his mind, and for the first time in years, he felt hope. Small, fragile, but real. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let that part of himself die again. And so, even though the boss had said, "If he plays the piano, I'll fire him," something inside him whispered back, "Then let's see what happens." The next morning, he came to work like nothing had happened. The air inside the factory was heavy with smoke and the usual metallic smell that never went away. Everyone moved slowly, half asleep, waiting for the coffee in the break room to wake them up. The machines started roaring, drowning out all thought, and yet somewhere in that noise he could still hear the soft echo of the piano in his mind. No one talked about what happened. It was like an unspoken secret, passed around through small looks and half smiles. The workers who had heard him play didn't dare mention it out loud, but when he walked past, some of them nodded quietly, like a sign of respect. They all knew what the boss had said, and they all knew he had still played. He tried to focus on his work. The day stretched long and dull, every hour the same. But the memory of the piano pulled at him, stronger than before. He had forgotten what it felt like to be good at something, In this place, no one cared about who you were before. They only cared about what you could do for 8 hours a day. But now, for the first time, he remembered that there was more to him than just this job. When the lunch bell rang, he stayed back at his station, pretending to fix something. He didn't want to go to the canteen where everyone might stare. But as he wiped his hands, one of the younger workers approached him, holding a small cup of tea. "You played again last night, didn't you?" the young man asked in a low voice. He looked up, surprised. "How do you know?" "I heard from the janitor. He told a few of us. Said it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard inside this place." He smiled awkwardly, unsure what to say. The young man leaned closer. "You should keep playing. Not here maybe, but somewhere. People need to hear that. You made us all feel something we'd forgotten." He didn't know how to respond to that. The words made his throat tighten a little. Before he could speak, the bell rang again and the young man walked away, leaving him with his thoughts. That night, when he walked home, the streets were quiet. The shops were closing, and the sky was the color of old steel. He passed by a small cafe that had a broken neon sign in the window. Through the glass, he saw a few tables, a coffee machine, and a small stage in the corner. On that stage stood a piano. It looked worn, but it was real. He stopped walking. His heart began to beat faster. He stood there for a long minute, staring through the window, wondering what it would be like to sit there and play, not in secret, not hiding from anyone, but in front of people who wanted to listen. He didn't go in that night. He just kept walking, but he couldn't shake the image of that piano. The next few days, he worked as usual. The boss didn't say anything to him, but every time their eyes met, he could feel the warning behind that stare. Still, he couldn't help himself. Every evening after everyone left, he would sneak into the canteen for a few minutes. He didn't play loudly, just enough to feel the keys under his fingers again. It was his secret time, his few stolen moments of peace. Sometimes the janitor would listen from the doorway, sitting quietly with his mop beside him. They didn't talk much, they didn't need to. One played, the other listened, that was enough. But things don't stay hidden forever. One evening, as he was playing, the door opened. Not quietly, not gently, but with the heavy sound of someone who wanted to be noticed. He froze. His hands stopped on the keys. It was the boss. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The boss walked closer, slowly, his shoes echoing on the tiled floor. "I see you didn't take me seriously," he said in a calm voice that was worse than shouting. He stood up quickly. "I'm sorry, sir, I didn't mean any harm. Just what?" The boss interrupted. "You think this is a concert hall? I told you once and you still disobey me. Do you think this place runs on music?" He looked down. "No, sir. I just wanted to play for a few minutes after work." The boss sighed and shook his head. "You don't understand how the world works, do you? Dreamers like you waste time. This is a business. You come here to work, not to chase fantasies." There was a long silence. The man wanted to say something about how music wasn't just a fantasy, how it was the only thing that had ever made him feel alive. But the words stayed stuck in his throat. The boss turned and started walking away. Then he stopped near the door and said, without turning around, "You're done here, collect your pay tomorrow." The words hit like a punch. He stood there, frozen, staring at the piano. When the boss left, the canteen felt colder, emptier. He sat down again, his hands trembling. He didn't cry, though something inside him wanted to. He just sat there for a long time, staring at the piano, thinking of how quickly a moment of peace could turn into loss. The next morning, he packed his things in silence. Some of the workers looked at him, confused. They had heard rumors but didn't believe it was true. The young man from before came up to him. "They really fired you?" he whispered. He nodded slowly. "I guess so." "That's not fair." He gave a small smile. "Maybe not, but maybe it's time for something else." The boss didn't even look at him when he handed in his badge. It was like he had never existed. He walked out of the factory gate and didn't look back. The air outside felt different. Strange, a little scary, but also lighter. But also, For the first time in years, he had nowhere to go. But somehow that felt better than staying in a place where he had to hide who he was. He wandered through the streets for hours, not sure what to do next. He passed the cafe again, the one with the piano. This time he stopped. Inside, there were only a few people sitting quietly. A woman behind the counter looked up and smiled politely. He hesitated at the door, then stepped in. The smell of coffee and fresh bread filled the air. He sat at an empty table, still unsure of why he was there. The woman came over. "What can I get you?" "Just tea, please," he said softly. As she turned to go, he looked toward the stage again. The piano was even older up close, with scratches on the side and a few chipped keys. But it had character, warmth, something real. When she brought his tea, he asked, "That piano, does anyone play it?" "Sometimes," she said. "On weekends, mostly. Some local musicians stop by. You play?" He hesitated, then nodded. "A little." She smiled. "You should play then. The stage is free right now." He looked around nervously. "Now? I don't think I can." "Why not?" she said kindly. "It's just a small cafe. People come here to relax. No one will judge you." He thought for a moment. Then he stood up slowly and walked toward the piano. His hands shook a little as he lifted the lid. The sound of the keys was familiar but new at the same time. He sat down and took a deep breath. At first, he just played a few soft notes, almost afraid to be heard. Then the melody began to form, the same one he had played in the factory canteen. It filled the quiet cafe, wrapping around the sound of clinking cups and soft conversation. The people at the tables turned their heads, surprised by the unexpected music. When he finished, there was silence for a moment, then gentle applause. Someone said, "That was beautiful." He looked up, smiling for the first time in days. The woman behind the counter clapped her hands. "You're welcome to play here any time," she said. That night, when he walked home, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. He didn't have a job anymore, but he had his music back. And for once, that felt like enough. He started coming to the cafe every evening. At first, he played just for himself. But soon, more people began to show up. Some came just to listen. They'd ask him to play certain songs, and he'd smile shyly before starting. It wasn't much, but it gave him purpose. The owner started paying him a small amount to perform on weekends. He didn't earn much, less than he had at the factory. But he was happy. Truly happy. One evening, as he was finishing a song, he noticed a man sitting near the door watching quietly. When the music stopped, the man walked over. He wore a suit and looked like someone from a music company. "That was wonderful," the man said. "Do you play professionally?" He laughed softly. "No, sir. Just here." The man handed him a card. "Come by this address tomorrow. We might have something for you." He looked at the card, not quite believing it. As he walked home that night, the same melody played in his head again, the one that had started it all. The same tune that got him fired but also gave him back his life. He didn't know where that card would lead. Maybe nowhere. But one thing he knew for sure: he wasn't going to stop playing again. Because even if the world laughed or threatened or turned away, the piano would always be there. And now so would he. The sun peeked through the thin curtains of his small apartment, waking him with a soft glow. The morning light fell across his piano, the one the cafe owner had helped him buy secondhand after months of saving. It wasn't perfect, and one of the keys stuck sometimes and the wood was chipped in places, but to him, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. Every morning began the same way now. He'd make a cup of tea, sit at the piano, and play a few quiet notes before the city outside fully woke up. It had become a routine, almost like breathing. Music had turned from something he did into something he lived. His days were filled with new things. Some mornings he taught his small group of students, children mostly, but a few adults too. They came to his small apartment or the cafe's back room, eager to learn. Watching them discover music made him happy in a way he hadn't felt in years. One of his students, a young boy with big curious eyes, reminded him of himself. The boy's family couldn't afford much, but he practiced with determination, even on a cardboard cutout of a keyboard his mother had made for him. Seeing that kind of dedication touched his heart deeply. He never charged the boy's family for lessons. "You just keep learning," he said. "That's enough." Word began to spread about the quiet man who played so beautifully at the cafe. People started coming from nearby neighborhoods just to listen. Some even recorded his music on their phones and shared it online. He didn't know much about the internet or social media, but one of the younger cafe workers showed him how many people had liked and shared his videos. He couldn't believe it. Thousands of views, hundreds of comments, people writing things like, "His music feels like peace," and "You can hear his soul in those notes." It was strange and wonderful at the same time. He never imagined that something so simple could reach so many hearts. The cafe owner was delighted too. "You're bringing new life to this place," she told him one evening. "People come here now because they know you'll be playing." He smiled shyly. "I just play what I feel." "And that's exactly why they love it," she said. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. A man came into the cafe with a small camera and a microphone. He introduced himself as someone who ran a local TV channel that focused on inspiring community stories. "I've heard about you," the man said. "People say you play from the heart. Would you mind if we filmed you for our program? It's called Everyday Heroes." He was surprised. "I'm not a hero," he said quietly. The man smiled. "Maybe not. But you've touched people's lives. That's what matters." After thinking for a moment, he agreed. The next week, they filmed him at the cafe. They asked about his past, how he learned to play, and why he kept going after losing his job. He answered honestly but simply. "Music saved me," he said. When everything else fell apart, this was the only thing that made sense. When the segment aired on television, the response was incredible. People recognized him on the street, stopped to thank him, or just smiled and said they loved his music. The cafe became busier than ever. The owner had to add more tables to fit everyone. One evening, a letter arrived in the cafe's mailbox addressed to him. It was from a music school in another city. They had seen the television story and wanted to invite him to perform at a charity concert they were hosting. The event was meant to raise funds for underprivileged children who wanted to learn music but couldn't afford instruments or lessons. He read the letter twice, his hands trembling. It felt unreal. That night, he sat at the piano long after the cafe had closed, thinking about it. He remembered how he used to play for his mother when she was sick, how music had been the only comfort in those difficult days. Maybe this was his chance to give something back, to share the same comfort with others. He accepted the invitation. The concert was to be held in a large auditorium, something he had never seen before. When he arrived for the rehearsal, he stood quietly on the stage, looking out at the rows of empty seats. His heart pounded. He had played in small places, in a factory canteen, a cafe, but this was different. The organizer, a kind woman with glasses, smiled at him. "Don't worry," she said. "Once you start playing, it'll feel just like home." When the evening came, the hall was full. Families, children, teachers, people from all walks of life sat waiting. He took a deep breath and walked onto the stage, the soft light shining on him. For a moment, he closed his eyes. Then his hands found the keys and the music began. He played not just notes, but memories. The sound of struggle, loss, hope, and finally peace. The room was silent except for the music. When the last note faded, the audience erupted in applause. Some stood clapping and cheering. He looked out at them, his eyes wet with emotion. After the show, several people came up to him. One woman said, "Your music reminded me of my father. Thank you." Another whispered, "I felt every word, even though you didn't speak." He didn't know what to say. All he could do was smile and nod. When he returned to the cafe, everyone there celebrated him like a hero. The owner baked a cake. His students brought small handmade cards that said things like, "You make the world better and never stop playing." But what touched him most was a message that came a few days later. It was from his old coworker from the factory, the young man who had once encouraged him to play. "I saw you on TV," the message said. Everyone at the factory did. The boss saw it too. He didn't say anything, but I could tell he was proud. "We all are. You showed us there's more to life than work." He read the message twice and felt something warm spread through his chest. Time passed, and his music continued to grow. He started playing small shows in nearby towns. Sometimes he was invited to teach at community centers. He never asked for much money. He just wanted to keep sharing his music. One evening, as he was teaching his young student, the boy's mother came up to him. "You've changed his life," she said softly. "He used to be quiet and sad. Now he wakes up early just to practice." "Thank you," he smiled. "Music does that. It gives people something to hold on to." The boy looked up at him and said, "One day I'll play on a big stage like you." He chuckled gently. "And when you do, I'll be there to listen." Despite all the good things happening, he never forgot where he came from. Sometimes he walked past the old factory. The gates were still there, the noise of machines still echoing. He stood outside quietly, remembering the man he once was, and tired, hopeless, afraid to dream. Then he smiled, knowing he had finally escaped that shadow. One afternoon, he was sitting at the cafe when the janitor from the old factory walked in. The same old man who had once listened to him play in secret. "I saw you on TV," the janitor said proudly. "I knew you'd go far." He laughed and stood to shake the man's hand. "You were the first person who told me not to stop." "I never forgot that," the old man smiled. "You listened. That's what matters." They sat together for a while, drinking tea and talking about life. It felt like things had come full circle. That night, after everyone left, he stayed behind as usual, sitting by the piano. He played softly, his fingers moving with ease, his heart full of quiet gratitude. He thought about everything, the boss's warning, losing his job, finding the cafe, meeting new people, and how all of it had led him here. Life had taken away almost everything he had once known, only to return something much greater, his purpose. As the last note faded, he looked out the window. The city lights twinkled like stars and the streets below were calm. He smiled to himself and whispered, "Thank you," because now he understood something he never did before. Every loss, every struggle, every harsh word from the past had shaped him into who he was. He wasn't just the man who played the piano anymore. He was the man who refused to stop dreaming, and that made all the difference. Days turned into weeks, and life for him began to change in quiet but meaningful ways. The cafe that once had only a few customers was now always full, with people waiting just to hear him play. Sometimes he wondered how things had turned around so quickly, but deep down he knew it was because he had finally followed what he loved. He was still humble about it. When people came up to him asking for photos or saying how much they loved his music, he smiled shyly and thanked them. He didn't like to be treated like someone famous. He still took the bus, still bought cheap groceries, still lived in his small apartment. Nothing about his lifestyle had changed, only his heart had. But outside, his story kept spreading. A journalist from a national newspaper came to interview him one afternoon. She said people found comfort in his story. A man who had lost everything but found hope again through music. He hesitated at first, worried about all the attention, but she promised to write it with care. A week later, the article came out with the title, "The Man Who Plays from the Heart." It told his story, how he lost his job, how his boss had once laughed and said, "If he plays the piano, I'll fire him," and how that single moment had pushed him into a new life. People everywhere connected with it. Letters started arriving at the cafe, handwritten notes from strangers, some from faraway towns. One woman wrote, "Your story gave me courage to start painting again after 20 years. Another said, "I listen to your piano music when I feel alone. It helps me keep going." Reading those letters made him emotional. He realized now that music wasn't just about sound. It was about connection, about reaching hearts quietly but deeply. One morning, while he was preparing to leave for the cafe, he got a phone call from an unfamiliar number. When he answered, a calm voice on the other end said, "I'm calling from the City Music Conservatory. We've seen your interviews and videos. We'd love to have you as a guest teacher for a special workshop." He froze for a moment. "Me? But I'm not a professional teacher," he said. The voice replied kindly, "You don't need a title. You have something most teachers can't give. Real experience. The students could learn so much from your story and your way of playing." He didn't say yes right away. He needed time to think. The idea of standing in front of a classroom full of young, talented students felt intimidating. What could he teach them? He didn't even have formal music degrees. But that night, as he sat at his piano, he remembered how scared he was when he first started at the cafe, and how he had learned to face his fears one note at a time. So, he agreed. The conservatory sent a car to pick him up on the day of the workshop. It felt strange being treated so formally. When he entered the large building, filled with music echoing from every room, he felt a mix of nervousness and awe. In the classroom, around 20 students waited. Some looked curious, others skeptical. They were young, full of ambition, maybe even a little pride. He introduced himself softly, told them a little about his past, then said, "I'm not here to teach you how to play better. I'm here to remind you why you play." The students were quiet at first, unsure what he meant. Then he sat down at the piano and began to play. The tune was gentle, full of emotion. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. When he finished, the room was silent. Then one of the students whispered, "You play like you're telling a story." He smiled. That's exactly what music should be, a story without words. By the end of the session, the students looked at him differently. Some even asked him to show them how to put more feeling into their playing. For the first time, he felt like he was truly giving something valuable, not just music, but understanding. When he returned to the cafe that evening, the owner and his students were waiting for him. They had watched a short clip of his workshop that someone had uploaded online. They cheered when he walked in, clapping and laughing. He felt embarrassed but happy. He sat at the piano and played a soft tune to thank them. Life continued like this for a while, simple, peaceful, full of purpose. But soon something unexpected happened again. A producer from a well-known record company reached out. They wanted him to record an album of his piano pieces, not for fame or charts, but for a special project called Songs of the Soul. He hesitated once more. "I'm not sure I belong in a studio," he said. The producer replied, "You belong wherever your music takes you." They arranged for him to travel to a nearby city to record. The studio was a quiet space with soft lights and polished instruments. He had never been in such a place before. When he touched the piano there, it felt different, heavier, smoother, but still familiar once his fingers started moving. Over 3 days, he recorded 12 songs. Each one had a story behind it. The sound of early mornings at the cafe, the laughter of children learning their first notes, the memory of his mother's voice, the pain of losing his job, the peace of finding his path again. The producer was amazed. "You don't just play notes," he said. "You make people feel things." When the album was released, it didn't become a massive hit, but it spread quietly, just like his story had. It played in small bookshops, coffee places, and even on local radio. Listeners said it helped them relax, reflect, and find hope. He didn't think much about fame or money. What mattered most was that his music was reaching people who needed it. But one day, while he was cleaning up after a long day at the cafe owner walked over with her phone in hand, eyes wide. "You won't believe this," she said. "Your music was just played on a national radio program. They called you the man whose piano speaks to the heart." He laughed softly, almost in disbelief. "That's too much," he said, but inside, he felt a quiet sense of pride, not the proud kind that makes someone boast, but the gentle kind that makes them thankful. A few days later, an envelope arrived at the cafe again. This one was different. It was from the same factory where he had once worked. The letter was short, written by the new manager. It said, "We remember you well. You used to play during lunch breaks. We now play your music in the workshop every Friday. It reminds everyone that dreams never really die." He read it slowly, holding back tears. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about it. The same place where he once felt trapped, where music had been seen as a distraction, was now filled with his songs. Life really had a strange way of coming full circle. As weeks passed, more doors opened for him. He was invited to small music festivals, charity concerts, and community events. Everywhere he went, people wanted to know his secret, how he had turned pain into something beautiful. He always gave the same answer. "I didn't plan it. I just didn't stop." His humble nature made people love him even more. He never acted like a celebrity. He still helped clean tables at the cafe when it got busy, still gave free lessons to children who couldn't afford them, and still walked home under the same quiet streetlights. One evening, while playing a soft tune at the cafe, he noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was his old boss, the same man who had once laughed and said, "If he plays the piano, I'll fire him." Their eyes met. For a second, time froze. The boss looked older now, maybe a little regretful. He waited until the song ended, then walked up to the piano. "I came to hear for myself," the man said quietly. "They said you play like no one else." He looked up, unsure what to say. The boss paused, then added, "I was wrong back then. I didn't understand, but now I do. You were never just a worker. You were an artist waiting to be heard." There was no anger in his heart anymore. He smiled gently and said, "It's all right. Maybe I needed that moment to find my way." The boss nodded, looking down. "You've made something beautiful out of life. I respect that." He walked out soon after, leaving behind a silence that felt peaceful, not tense. For him, it felt like closure, the final piece of the past falling into place. Later that night, as the cafe lights dimmed and the last few customers left, he played one last song. It was calm, full of gratitude, almost like a quiet goodbye to the version of himself that once doubted, feared, and waited for permission to dream. Now he needed no permission. He had learned that life wasn't about the job you lose or the chances you miss. It was about what you do with what remains and how you turn it into something that keeps others warm. As he played that final note, he smiled softly. Outside, the night was cool, the streets calm. Inside, the music lingered like a heartbeat, gentle, real, alive. And in that moment, he knew the journey wasn't over yet. It was only beginning again, in a new and brighter way. The morning air was cool and calm, and the sound of birds mixed softly with the quiet hum of the city waking up. He sat by the window of his small apartment, a cup of tea in his hands, the piano beside him catching the sunlight. It had been years since the day his boss had laughed and said, "If he plays the piano, I'll fire him." Those words had once felt like an ending. Now they felt like the beginning of everything. He had played in so many places since then, small cafes, schools, community halls, even a few grand stages. But no matter where he played, he never let go of that feeling he had in the early days. The feeling of gratitude, the quiet joy of sharing something real. His name had become known in ways he never expected. People called him the man who healed hearts with music. Journalists wrote stories, radio hosts played his songs, and sometimes strangers stopped him on the street just to thank him. Yet through it all, he stayed humble. He always said the same thing when people praised him: "I'm just a man who loves the piano." The cafe where his journey had started had become something of a landmark. Travelers passing through the city would stop by, just to sit at one of the tables and listen to him play. The owner still ran the place with her warm smile and strong heart, though she now had more help. On the wall hung a framed photograph of him at the piano taken years earlier. Above it were the words, "Dreams don't end. They change shape." One afternoon while he was cleaning the piano, the cafe owner came over holding a letter. "This came for you," she said. "Looks important." He wiped his hands and opened it carefully. It was an invitation from an international music festival, one of the biggest in the region. They wanted him to perform as a special guest. His heart skipped a beat. It wasn't something he ever imagined happening. He looked at the letter for a long moment, unsure whether to laugh or cry. The cafe owner smiled. "You should go," she said softly. "This is your time," he hesitated. "But that's a huge stage." "I'm not sure I belong there," she shook her head. "You've belonged on every stage you've ever played. This one's no different." So he accepted. The festival was held in a beautiful city by the sea. Musicians from all over the world came to perform, people with great training, years of fame, and perfect skill. He arrived quietly, carrying only a small bag and his old sheet of handwritten notes. During rehearsals, some of the other performers were curious about him. "You're the man from the cafe story, aren't you?" one of them asked. "The one who lost his job because he loved to play?" He nodded shyly. "That was a long time ago." "Well," the other musician said with a grin, "looks like it turned out all right." When the night of the festival arrived, the grand hall was filled with people, thousands of them. The lights were bright, the crowd buzzing with excitement. Backstage, he sat quietly, his hands resting on his knees, breathing slowly. He thought of everything that had brought him here. His mother's voice, the laughter in the cafe, the faces of the children he had taught. When his name was announced, The applause was warm and gentle, like an embrace. He walked to the piano, bowed slightly, and sat down. For a moment he said nothing. Then he looked out at the crowd and said softly, "I used to play in a small factory during lunch breaks. I didn't think anyone was listening back then. Now I know someone always was." And then he began to play. The piece started softly, like a whisper of memory. It told his story, Mao, the struggle, the loneliness, the hope that had refused to die. As the notes grew stronger, the music filled the hall, wrapping around everyone like a warm light. Some closed their eyes. Some held hands. Some simply sat still, feeling something they couldn't explain. When the last note faded, there was silence. A deep, emotional silence. And then, a wave of applause that seemed to last forever. He stood up slowly, bowed, and smiled. After the performance, people surrounded him, congratulating him, thanking him. Reporters wanted interviews, photographers wanted pictures. But he didn't stay long. Instead, he slipped outside quietly, away from the bright lights, and walked toward the beach. The sound of the waves reminded him of his music, steady, endless, full of rhythm. He sat down on the sand, watching the moon's reflection on the water. For the first time in a long while, he let himself rest. He thought of the boy he had once been, the one who used to dream quietly at the back of the factory, the one who played softly so no one would hear. He wished he could go back and tell that boy, "Don't give up. The world might not see you now, but one day it will." The next morning, as he was preparing to leave the city, an older man approached him at the train station. "I saw you play last night," the man said. "My wife passed away 2 years ago, and for the first time since then, I felt peace listening to your music." "Thank you." He felt his throat tighten. "Thank you for saying that," he said softly. "That means more than you know." Moments like that reminded him why he played. It was never for money or fame. It was to touch hearts, even just one at a time. Months later, his music from the festival performance was shared online. It spread far beyond what he could imagine. People from other countries began sending messages. Students, parents, workers, all saying the same thing. His story gave them hope. One video clip even reached a school for children with disabilities. The teachers wrote to him, saying the children listened to his piano pieces every morning before class because it made them feel calm. When he read that, he couldn't hold back his tears. He decided to visit that school. When he arrived, the children welcomed him with laughter and songs. They showed him a small room where an old keyboard stood, their music room. "We play your songs here," one of them said proudly. He sat down and began to play something gentle. The children clapped along, some sang softly. The room was full of pure joy. No stage lights, no cameras, just hearts connected by sound. When he finished, one little girl handed him a paper flower. "For you," she said, "because your music makes us happy." He held it carefully, feeling his eyes water again. It was the simplest gift he'd ever received, and somehow the most precious. Years passed, but his heart stayed the same. He kept playing, teaching, and traveling when he could. He never forgot the people who had believed in him. The cafe owner, the janitor, the young student. The people who had cheered him on when he was nobody. One evening, long after the cafe had closed, he sat at the piano alone. The lights were dim and outside the city was quiet. He ran his fingers across the keys slowly, letting the sound drift softly through the empty room. He thought about everything. The pain, the laughter, the journey that had changed him. He realized that what mattered most wasn't how far he had gone, but how deeply he had lived. He looked at the piano, its keys worn from years of playing, and smiled. "We've come a long way," he whispered. The cafe owner walked in quietly and stood by the door. "You're still here," she said gently. He looked up. "I guess I don't know how to stop," she smiled. "Don't. The world still needs your music," he nodded. "Maybe it does. But even if no one listened anymore, I'd still play." She walked over and placed a small envelope on the piano. "Someone dropped this off earlier," she said. Didn't say who it was. He opened it slowly. Inside was a note that read, "Thank you for showing me that every sound, no matter how small, can mean something. You were my first teacher. I made it. I'm playing on a big stage now." It was from his young student, the boy who once practiced on cardboard keys. He sat back, smiling through tears. Life had come full circle again. That night he played one final piece, and not a song of sadness but of quiet peace. The notes drifted out into the street where people walking by paused to listen. Some smiled, not knowing who played, just knowing it sounded beautiful. When the last note faded, he closed his eyes and let the silence stay. He didn't need applause. The music had already said everything. He stood up, turned off the lights, and walked outside. The air was cool, the stars bright above him. The city hummed softly, alive, awake, endless. He took a deep breath and smiled. He had once been a man afraid of losing everything. Now he was a man who had gained what mattered most: purpose, peace, and a melody that would never end. And somewhere, perhaps in another small room, another person was listening, maybe learning, maybe dreaming, just like he once did. Because music, like hope, never truly stops. It only finds new hands to play it.